Convenience stores. Open 24 hours, places built for your convenience. But what if you had to work there for an overnight shift? Or stumbled in on the wrong customers? It's a place where anyone can come in, so there's bound to be some unwanted guests. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and get ready for 3 horror stories. Welcome! I hated working the early shift. Around 6 years ago, I worked in a small convenience store in a pretty quiet neighborhood. I was around 18 at the time, maybe a little older, and all of the staff were female. With it being such a small store, we literally had 5 staff members who rotated shifts. I remember that when this incident took place, the manager had decided to take a sick leave, and that left little old me to run the store, as I had been working there the longest. Our tiny little shop opened at 5 in the morning, and being the good sport that I am, I decided that I would work the early shifts because the other members of staff were a little nervous with their lack of training on opening. And the fact that it was being the middle of winter, it was actually a little unnerving opening a store completely on your own while it was so dark and evidently quiet. This one morning, I opened the shutters at around 4:30 a.m. I turned on the crappy little heater as I made my way out to the back to make myself a coffee, then went to the front of the store where our newspapers were sat waiting to be put on the shelves. I got the papers out and headed outside for a cigarette before opening. The few feet of snow added to the eeriness of this morning. Around 6 a.m. every morning, we would get a steady flow of builders and workmen coming in to buy a few Kit Kats and Red Bulls. Knowing them all quite well, I often took some form of comfort, knowing that if anything went wrong, I had a lot of big men heading in to save the day. This morning, 6 a.m. came, and I had quite literally not a single customer. I bet the snow was too bad to work. I flicked through magazines and drank too much coffee just to keep occupied. At around 6:30 a.m., I popped into the kitchen to turn on the kettle, and I heard someone coming in and cough at the counter. I made my way out from the back to see a tall, lanky, intoxicated man standing staring at the cigarettes. I apologized for his delay and asked him what I can help him with. I'm horrible. I was taken aback a little by what this man said, and repeat myself and asked what I can help with. I need you to punch me in the face. I'm a terrible man. I don't know why I did it. I don't know. At this point, I was borderline shitting bricks. I know that if this man wants to hurt me, there is literally fuck all I can do. I'm tiny in comparison. I try and play it off as a joke and say something along the lines of "Don't be crazy. I don't go punching people." The man is not amused by me. For the first time, he looks at me, leans over the counter, and starts slurring disgusting things that he wants to do to me. What if I fucked you so hard you couldn't breathe anymore? What if I made you bleed? I'm gonna make you gag on my cock for being a slut. I need you to punch me! My heart has stopped. We had no panic buttons. The only phone I had was just out of reach, but even if I had gotten it, there was literally nowhere to lock myself in while I waited for help. I was frozen. I just stared at this man blankly until I heard, "What the fuck did you just say?" And a loud crack as I watched my bleedy raper friend's jaw was no longer in line with his face. Apparently, when I was making my coffee, 2 customers had come in, Lanky Butt Nugget and one of my faithful builders that was later disappointed no one informed him it was a snow day. My builder pal wrestled our lovely friend out of the store, where he managed to pretty swiftly disappear, considering the amount of snow. That morning, I made my builder friend a cup of tea and didn't charge him for his purchases as a massive thank you for what he did. God knows what may have happened. So lanky, crooked face, bad man, let's not meet. Creeps at the convenience store. Please excuse any mistakes as this is my first post. Usual story, long-time lurker that figured I'd share some of my creepy encounters. For a bit of backstory, I was around 10 years old at this time, and it was the heat of summer about 10 years ago or so. My great-grandmother lived about an hour away from my parents and I, so I only saw her about once or twice for the holidays. That being said, this particular summer my cousin, 13 or 14 at the time, was living with my great-grandma for a few weeks. Now great-grandma lived in a very rural, tiny downtown, if you can call it that was made up of 2 streets and a mercantile general store. So, it would seem that everyone knew each other in this close-knit community. However, aside from its elderly residents, the cheap cost of living attracted all manner of drug users and shady characters. So one day during the summer, I had nothing to do, and my dad decided it might be fun for me to spend the afternoon with my cousin. Great. As an only child, I was thrilled to tag along with my cooler, edgier older cousin. We'll call her Sarah. Dad dropped me off early in the day, and we spent several hours watching movies and playing music. The standard for 2 tween girls. Soon enough, great-grandma decides she needs some supplies from the store. At this point, grandma has quite a time hobbling around, so she asks if Sarah and I will run a block over to the general store for milk and some other random things. I, a natural worrier, already felt uneasy at this. At 10, my mom rarely allowed me to take jaunts on my own, especially not in unfamiliar territory. Plus, I had heard plenty of stories of the drug bust, fights, and crimes around grandma's neck of the woods to have a reason for being anxious. But I put on my brave face and reassured myself it was broad daylight and only a stone's throw away from grandma's. Heading down the street, I start to feel pretty good. Here I am, accompanied by my hip older cousin, laughing and skipping rocks as we slowly meander to the store. I suppose it was at this point I let my guard down for a moment, as I failed to notice anything suspicious between the houses and our destination. When we arrived at the store, we spent some time dilly-dallying, pursuing movies and sweets, but I began to feel a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach not soon after. The way this store was laid out, the aisles were divided by shoulder-height shelves, so at any point, you could see any other shopping patrons. I glanced around, and my alarm bell started ringing as I saw an older man, tall, in his mid to late 20s, staring from across the store. Beside him was a short, rotund man with a gray beard that looked much older, maybe in his 50s. I tried to brush it off, but could not shake the feeling of being watched. Sarah didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, so I gave her a nudge and whispered that the man were staring. She shrugged it off, and we continued to scan the aisles, checking off Grandma's list as we went. Suddenly, I noticed the men approaching, walking right towards us. I quickly became engrossed in the nutrition facts of whatever box I was holding, leaving my older cousin to handle the confrontation. "Hi there," the younger man said, smiling. He was one aisle away from Sarah, and she smiled back, much more outgoing than shy me was. "Hey," she replied. I couldn't help but notice the older, balding man leering behind the speaker, almost ogling around his companion to look at us. I desperately wanted to bolt, but Sarah seemed intent on finishing the task at hand. "How old are you girls?" the young man asked. This automatically freaked me out. I had enough lectures from my mom and enough lessons in school about stranger danger to know better than to give my personal information out. 13, Sarah blurted, oblivious to the potential trap. The men looked disheveled, unshaven and filthy, as if they hadn't showered for days. I hoped that someone would save us, but we were the only customers in the store. "Well, you sure are pretty," he continued, edging closer to Sarah. Finally, she seemed to understand that something about the situation was off. The man had no groceries, no baskets, and just gave off some seriously bad vibes. As I was several aisles behind Sarah, I did not manage to hear the rest of their brief conversation. Whatever was said was enough to warrant a stern glance from her and a quick 100 to the checkout. She grabbed my arm and yanked me, power walking with her half-done shopping. The cashier seemed to take ages to realize we were waiting for assistance as the men followed us to the counter. "They're probably just buying lotto tickets," Sarah whispered, though I could tell she was spooked. We scrambled to pay, the cashier completely oblivious to the weirdo child predators looming behind us with their odd grins. Sarah and I kept it cool until we hit the doors, at which point we sprinted across the street and down the block, bags in hand, not looking back until we hit corner. I saw the men, empty-handed, looking a bit disappointed that they hadn't lured us. I realized we probably should have gone elsewhere so as not to alert them about our whereabouts, but neither of us lived here, so we just booked it back to Grandma's. At this point, I felt uneasy and terrible for the rest of the day, but we agreed telling Great-Grandma was pointless as she was rather cold and also unable to do much in terms of protection. We casually locked the doors and closed the blinds. It wasn't until the car ride home that I told my mom about the incident. "She let you walk to the store? Alone?" she said frantically. It was then that my mom chose to tell me that she had heard from one of my great-grandma's friends that a young man that lived next door to the store had been discovered as a registered pedophile, and she specifically requested that I not go outside without an adult present to supervise. Needless to say, I did not visit Grandma alone again. And to the presumed predators at the convenience store, let's not meet again. Convenience store stalker. I've had many experiences with crazy, creepy, dangerous, or obsessive people, but few have shaken me up as much as what happened a few months ago. I work part-time at a convenience store a few blocks from where I live. My father is old friends with the store owner and managed to get me a job to work for a little while to help pay for college. It's a store that's open 24 hours, so I usually work the evening and night shift due to the fact that I attend classes at a community college during the day a few times a week, and that I'm a bit of an insomniac anyways, so sleep doesn't really come easy, nor do I sleep much to begin with. Because my work is so close, I walk to and from work, arriving around 8:30 p.m. and working until about 4 a.m. Work is pretty easy. I usually just sit around and stare at my phone most of the time. Everything goes pretty smoothly. The usual suspects come in: smokers, police officers, teenagers who snuck out of their house to grab some snacks. Nobody really makes a scene. They just get their stuff and be on their way. But around 2 months ago, I noticed a woman hanging around outside the store, usually by one of the big windows near the cash register where I sit. She would arrive around 2 a.m. and just stand there smoking a cigarette, occasionally glancing through the window at me. When she was finished with her smoke, she would crush the stub with her shoe and walk away, but not before one final stare through the window at me. It kind of creeped me out, but I felt pretty safe to be honest. The store is well lit, with security cameras, so I took comfort in that. I just assumed that she was homeless and was just zonked out on whatever drug she got her hands on that night, and just tried to ignore her. She isn't the first homeless and druggie who has hung around the store like this, but they usually ignore me. There was something about her that made me feel uneasy. So every night she did this for about a month, arriving at around 2 a.m., standing outside to smoke a cigarette, casually attempting to steal glances at me when she thinks I'm not paying attention, and then leaving once her cigarette is smoked. I talked to my boyfriend about it, and he agreed that it was probably just a druggie and to try and ignore her. After a month of this, I had learned to ignore her completely. Then one night at about 2 weeks ago, it was 3 a.m., 30 minutes before the guy on the next shift would arrive to take my place. I was in the back of the store organizing some bottles on the shelves when I heard the ring of someone walking through the door. I don't know how I knew, maybe it was just the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up, but my heart pounding in my head told me it was her. I swallowed hard, turned around, and there she was at the opposite end of the aisle, staring right at me. I glanced around the store and realized nobody else was here, only her and I. My hands started to shake, but I swallowed my overwhelming sense of fear and mustered out a weak, "Can I help you with anything?" She smiled this weird, creepy smile and tilted her head back. She began running her hands all over her body and whispering something I couldn't understand. My fear turned to confusion, and I asked again if there was anything I could help her with. She stopped touching herself and whispering abruptly, then suddenly bolted towards me. Stopping just inches from my face, she leaned in closer, and without touching me, she whispered, "You're very pretty, very, very pretty." I could smell her rancid breath and the suffocating stench of her body odor. I screwed my eyes shut and was on the verge of tears when suddenly a voice from the front of the store spoke up. "What's going on here?" It was my coworker, here to take over his shift. I held my breath as she backed away slowly, her eyes locked on mine. Right before she walked out the door, she smiled that creepy smile and winked at me. My coworker rushed over to me, and I collapsed into his arms. I began crying uncontrollably, and he called the police as well as our boss. The police searched the area, but never found her. My coworker gave me a ride home and walked me to my door and explained the situation to my boyfriend as I was in hysterics. Police were parked outside my apartment complex for a few days to keep an eye out, but nothing happened. I have been trying to get over the incident and have been considering to quit my job. It was a really traumatic, and I don't really know how to deal with it. It was the scariest and most helpless moment in my life. Be careful, ladies, if you work night shifts anywhere. I never thought it could happen to me either.